Introduction: The voice that never leaves you. Before you spoke to another human being today, you may have already spoken dozens of sentences to yourself. Perhaps it happened in the brief, gray space between sleep and wakefulness. Perhaps it arrived the moment your feet touched the floor. You might have looked in the mirror and allowed a single, familiar judgment to pass through your mind. Or, as you remembered the list of responsibilities waiting for you, you felt that sudden, heavy contraction in your chest, a silent announcement that you are already behind, that you are not enough, or that the day ahead is a mountain you are not equipped to climb. You likely did not notice these words. You are so accustomed to the voice that it has become part of the background, like the hum of a refrigerator or the sound of your own breathing. It is simply the way things are. It is you. But there is a haunting possibility that needs to be considered. What if the voice you hear is yourself, the one that explains your life to you, judges your actions, predicts your failures, and assesses your worth, is not entirely your own? What if you have been carrying a conversation in your mind that was started by others, repeated by you, and eventually mistaken for the truth? We tend to assume that our thoughts are the result of conscious deliberation. We imagine that we carefully weigh evidence, analyze our experiences, and reach logical conclusions about who we are. Yet, for most of us, the internal dialogue is far more automated. It is a recurring script. It arrives before we invite it. It speaks in the tone of authority, even when its content is demonstrably false. This audiobook is not a lecture on how to think positively. It is not an invitation to force your mind into a state of artificial joy or to repeat affirmations that feel like lies. That path only leads to deeper resistance. Instead, we are going to explore the mechanics of your inner architecture. We are going to look at the process by which a sentence, repeated often enough, hardens into a belief, and how that belief begins to shape your perception of the world. We will investigate the hidden loop. The words become familiar. Familiarity creates a sense of comfort, even when the words are painful. That comfort disguises itself as truth. And because your mind is a brilliant, tireless system designed to find evidence for what you already believe, it begins to filter your reality to ensure that your internal world remains consistent with the stories you have been telling yourself. You are not the victim of your own mind, but you may have been a passive participant in its programming. You may have unknowingly defended a negative self-concept simply because it was the only reality you were taught to expect. But there is a threshold, a moment where the listener within you wakes up. When you begin to hear the voice not as you, but as a narrative, a recording that has been playing for years, the grip it holds over your life begins to loosen. We have much ground to cover. We must look at the origins of these voices, the way they are reinforced through behavior, and the subtle, often invisible ways they influence the decisions you make every single day. We must also grapple with the most difficult question of all: if you were to stop defining yourself through these old sentences, what would remain? We are not going to rush this. We are going to walk through these layers one by one. You do not need to change anything today. You only need to listen. You only need to start noticing. The goal of this journey is not to control your mind, but to become conscious of it. For now, simply hold this question in the silence: how much of the life you experience is influenced by words you have repeated so often that you no longer realize you are saying them? It is time to begin listening. Chapter 1: The words you don't know you're saying. The most influential words in your life are not the ones spoken by your parents, your teachers, your friends, or your critics. They are not the words you read in books or hear on stages. The most influential words are the ones you whisper to yourself in the privacy of your own mind, so consistently and so automatically that they have ceased to sound like opinions. They sound like facts. Consider the aftermath of a minor failure. You make a mistake at work, or you fail to follow through on a commitment to yourself. The moment the event occurs, a sentence arrives. It doesn't ask for your permission. It doesn't wait for you to sit down and analyze the situation. It arrives fully formed: I always ruin things. I am incapable of following through. Why do I even bother? If you were to look at those sentences as if they were written on a page, you would immediately see their absurdity. You do not always ruin things. You are not incapable. Yet, at the moment, you do not question them. You feel the weight of them. The sentence arrives, and because it feels familiar, you accept it as a valid description of your character. This is the nature of automatic inner speech. It is the rapid-fire narrator that provides a running commentary on your life. It is fast, it is reflexive, and it is largely unconscious. When you look in the mirror, the voice might comment on your appearance before you even have a chance to look at yourself with neutral eyes. When you receive a bill, the voice might instantly project a future of scarcity. When you consider a new opportunity, the voice might immediately list the reasons why it will end in disaster. Why does the mind do this? Because it is efficient. It hates uncertainty. It wants to categorize experiences quickly so it can move on to the next task. If it can attach a label to an event, this is a failure, this is a disaster, this is typical of me, it feels a sense of resolution. It doesn't matter if the label is accurate, it only matters that the label is familiar. Many people spend their entire lives believing they are a certain type of person, never realizing that this identity is constructed from a foundation of these automated, repetitive sentences. You think you are bad with money, so when you manage your finances, you feel the familiar tension of that label. You think you are difficult to love, so in your relationships, you subconsciously interpret neutral actions as signs of impending abandonment. You are not merely experiencing life, you are experiencing your interpretation of life, and that interpretation is being dictated by an inner narrator you haven't yet learned to edit. The danger here is not in the occasional negative thought. We all have moments of doubt, fear, and self-criticism. That is part of being human. The danger lies in the repetition. When a thought is a guest, it comes and goes. When a thought becomes a resident, it begins to decorate the house. It rearranges the furniture of your mind until you can no longer remember what the space looked like before it arrived. You might be thinking that you are different, that you are aware of your thoughts. But awareness is not the same as recognition. You can be aware of the feeling of being a failure without ever realizing that the word failure is a linguistic choice you are making. You are so identified with the internal voice that you treat its pronouncements as the absolute truth of your existence. This is the first step toward freedom, distinguishing between the event and the description. When something happens, you lose a job, a relationship ends, you miss a goal, that is the event. The sentence that follows, I am a failure, I am unlovable, I am a fraud, is the description. Most of us mistake the description for the event itself. We think I lost my job, therefore I am a failure. But the I am is an addition. It is a layer of interpretation you have added to the experience. And because you have added it 1,000 times, you have forgotten that it was an addition in the first place. You have forgotten that you are the one who is witnessing the event, not the one who is failing. In the chapters to come, we will explore where these descriptions come from and why we cling to them even when they make us miserable. But for today, notice the gap. Pay attention to the space between something happening and the voice that tells you what that something means. That gap is where your power resides. It is the thin sliver of time where you can choose to listen to the narrative, or where you can simply acknowledge the event and let the narrative pass by. Do not try to stop the voice. Do not try to argue with it. Just notice how often it speaks. Notice how quickly it labels your life. Notice how it takes an experience and immediately turns it into a story about who you are. You have been speaking to yourself all day. It is time to start listening to what you have been saying. Chapter Summary. The invisible narrator. Most inner speech is automatic, reflexive, and happens before we consciously choose our response. Familiarity versus truth. We often mistake the familiarity of a thought for its validity. Just because a statement feels true doesn't mean it corresponds to reality. The power of labels. Automatic thoughts function as quick labels that help the mind categorize events, often at the expense of accuracy. Identification. We suffer because we identify with our descriptions of events rather than the events themselves. The event versus the description. There is a crucial distinction between what happens in our lives, the event, and the story we tell ourselves about it, the description. The gap. Freedom begins in the brief interval between an event occurring and the mind's automatic attempt to define it. Observation. The goal is not to eliminate thoughts but to observe the habitual patterns that define how we experience. Chapter 2, Who taught you to speak to yourself this way? If you have begun to notice the automatic nature of your inner voice, a new question inevitably arises. If these sentences are so automatic, and if they arrive with such authority, where did they come from? Did you truly choose to view yourself through this specific lens? The truth is, we are born into a language that has already been spoken for us. From the moment we begin to grasp the concepts of self and other, we are absorbing the voices of the people around us. We are like sponges, soaking up the way our parents describe their own failures, the way our teachers categorize our intelligence, and the way our peers measure our worth. Consider the child who is told, "You are always so careless." That child does not immediately internalize the statement as a temporary observation. They internalize it as a truth about their identity. Years later, when that child, now an adult, drops a glass or makes a clerical error, the voice of the parent is no longer needed. The adult has learned the script so well that they can perform the role of the critic without any external prompt. They have taken the external voice and turned it into an internal one. This is the quiet transmission of identity. It happens through praise, through criticism, through comparison, and through the subtle ways we are rewarded for conforming to certain roles. We learn which sentences gain us love and which sentences bring us shame. We learn to repeat the expectations placed upon us, not because we believe them, but because they have become the boundaries of our known world. This is not to say that our parents or teachers were malicious. Most of the time, they were simply repeating the voices that were given to them. They were passing on their own fears, their own survival strategies, and their own limitations. They were teaching us how to survive in the world as they understood it. But in doing so, they also taught us how to limit ourselves. We internalize not just the words, but the rhythm of those words. If you were raised in an environment where failure was treated as a catastrophe, you learn to speak to yourself with the same alarmist, fearful energy. If you were raised in an environment where success was expected but never celebrated, you learn to move through your achievements with a cold, detached indifference. You are not just repeating thoughts, you are repeating the emotional climate in which you were raised. This creates a paradox. You are using your own voice to continue a program that was written by someone else. You say, "I am not smart enough," and it sounds like your voice. It feels like your opinion. But if you were to trace that sentence back, you might find the ghost of a teacher who was frustrated by their own limitations, or the shadow of a sibling who needed to feel superior. Recognizing this is not about assigning blame. It is about reclaiming ownership. When you realize that some of your inner language is borrowed, you create the possibility of returning it. You start to see that you have been carrying a vocabulary that does not fit the person you are today. Some of these sentences served a purpose when you were younger. They helped you stay safe. They helped you avoid humiliation. They helped you navigate a difficult environment. But you are no longer that child. The environment has changed, and yet the script continues to play. The task is not to reject everything you have been told. It is to test it. When you notice a thought that limits you, a thought that says you are not this or you cannot do that, ask yourself, whose voice is this? Does this sentence actually belong to me, or is it a relic from a time when I had no control over my own narrative? By asking this, you stop being the passive recipient of your conditioning and become an active researcher of your own mind. You start to realize that many of the truths you hold about yourself are simply echoes of a world that no longer exists. You begin to understand that you have the power to stop repeating the stories that were handed to you, even if they have been playing in your mind for as long as you can remember. Chapter Summary. Borrowed voices. Much of our inner dialogue is a reflection of the voices we heard in childhood, parents, teachers, and peers. Internalization. External criticisms and observations are often internalized as permanent truths about our identity. Inherited limitations. We often repeat the fears and limitations of the adults who raised us, treating their survival strategies as our own. Emotional echoes. We inherit not just the words, but the emotional tone and rhythm with which our early environments processed life. Reclaiming ownership. Recognizing the origin of a thought allows us to separate it from our true self and decide if we want to keep it. The purpose of old scripts. Some negative self-talk originated as a way to stay safe in past environments, even if it is no longer useful now. Testing the truth. we must actively evaluate our limiting beliefs to determine if they are actually our. Chapter 3, When Repetition Begins to Feel Like Truth. We have seen that your inner voice is often a composite of inherited narratives. But how do these borrowed sentences survive for years, even decades, without being discarded? How does a simple, perhaps even accidental, thought evolve into a bedrock belief? The answer lies in the power of repetition. The human mind is a creature of habit. It craves consistency. When you repeat a sentence to yourself, "I always fail, I am not good enough, I am unlucky," you are creating a neural pathway. The first time you say it, it is a choice. The 100th time you say it, it is a reflex. By the 1000th time, it has become part of your landscape. It is like walking through a meadow. The first time you cross the grass, the path is invisible. If you walk the same route every day, the grass begins to flatten. Eventually, a dirt path emerges. Soon, the path is so worn that you find yourself walking it without even looking at the ground. You have forgotten that you created the path through the simple act of repeating your steps. This is how repetition creates the feeling of truth. It is not that the thought is objectively true, it is that the thought has become familiar. And in the architecture of the mind, familiarity is often mistaken for reality. When you think a thought, it registers in your brain. When you think about it again, it feels slightly more comfortable. By the time you have thought it thousands of times, the thought feels like an immutable law of nature. This is why it is so difficult to change how we see ourselves. If you have spent 10 years telling yourself you are bad with people, that is a very well-worn path in your mind. To change that belief, you cannot simply say the opposite once or twice. You are trying to build a new path in a meadow where the old one is deeply entrenched. Many people mistake the comfort of a negative thought for a sense of accuracy. They think, "I know this is true because I have thought about it so many times." But this is a logical fallacy. Repetition does not equal accuracy, it only equals frequency. If you tell a lie 1,000 times, it doesn't become the truth, but it does become a very familiar piece of information. The danger of this loop is that it blinds us to the possibility of change. We begin to confuse "I have failed" with "I am a failure." We take a sequence of experiences and summarize them into a single, static identity. We treat our past as a definitive guide to our future, ignoring the fact that our future is created in the present. The key to breaking this loop is recognizing that you have the power to stop walking the old path. You do not have to deny the past, but you can stop repeating the narrative that draws a straight line from that past to your future. When you catch yourself repeating an old, familiar sentence, pause. Ask yourself, "Am I saying this because it is true, or am I saying it because I have said it so many times that I don't know how to say anything else?" This simple question can be a turning point. It disrupts the habit. It forces you to step off the path and look at the ground. You might realize that the sentence you have been carrying is not a reflection of your potential, but a remnant of your habit. And the moment you recognize it as a habit, you gain the freedom to cultivate a new one. It will take time. The old path won't disappear overnight. But if you stop feeding the old narrative with your repetition, the grass will begin to grow over it. And with every new, conscious thought you choose to practice, you are laying the seeds for a new direction. Chapter Summary. The habitual mind, repetition creates neural pathways that make thoughts feel increasingly comfortable and automatic over time. The illusion of truth, we often mistake familiarity for accuracy. The more often we think a thought, the more true it feels. The path analogy, beliefs are like well-worn paths, we walk them without thinking because the ground has been flattened by repetition. Static identity. Constant repetition leads us to summarize complex lives into simple, static identities, e.g., "I am a failure." Frequency versus accuracy. A thought's frequency of occurrence is not a measurement of its truth or its relevance to our current potential. Disruption. Pausing to question why we are repeating a thought is the first step in breaking the cycle of habitual programming. Cultivating new directions. Transformation requires the patience to stop reinforcing the old path and the intentionality to build a new one. Chapter 4, The Hidden Language of Identity. We have seen how repetition wears a path into the mind, creating a sense of familiarity that masquerades as truth. But the most profound impact of this repetition is not on our daily decisions, it is on our sense of self. We do not just think thoughts, we eventually begin to inhabit them. Consider the grammatical structure of your most common inner sentences. Pay attention to how often you use the words, I am. I am not good at this. I am always the one who gets left behind. I am just a person who struggles with money. I am not the kind of person who takes risks. These are not merely descriptions of experience. They are proclamations of identity. When you say, I failed at this task, you are describing an event. When you say, I am a failure, you are attaching that event to the core of your existence. You are taking a temporary circumstance, which is, by nature, fleeting and changeable, and giving it a permanent name. This is the hidden danger of the language we use to describe our lives. We have a tendency to define our self by our past struggles. We treat our history as a blueprint for our future. If you have a decade of history where you felt unconfident, you begin to identify as an unconfident person. But unconfident is a state of being, not a person. It is a feeling, not a noun. When you fuse an experience to your identity, you create a psychological prison. If you believe you are a failure, you no longer just fail at tasks, you embody failure. You begin to interpret the world through that lens. Every mistake becomes proof of who you are, and every success feels like an anomaly, a mistake that shouldn't have happened. You may even find yourself subconsciously sabotaging your own progress because success contradicts the identity you have built. To succeed would be to lose the self you have spent so long constructing. This is why changing your life feels so frightening. It is not just about changing your habits, it is about changing your definition of who you are. The mind is deeply invested in consistency. It would rather be right about its own limitations than be wrong and enter into the unknown territory of who you might be without those labels. You may have noticed that when you try to speak more kindly to yourself, you feel a strange resistance. It feels like self-deception. It feels like you are pretending to be someone you aren't. That resistance is not a sign that you are lying to yourself, it is the feeling of your old identity fighting to survive. Your ego has become attached to the story of your struggle, and it will defend that story because it is the only identity it knows. But here is the truth that often stays hidden: you are not your past. You are not your mistakes. You are not the labels you have inherited. You are the awareness that is noticing the labels. You are the space in which these thoughts occur. To step out of this prison, you must learn to dismantle the I am statements. Start by observing them without attachment. When you hear yourself say, I am lazy, practice shifting the language to, I notice I am having the thought that I am lazy. By adding that distance, you stop identifying with the label. You stop being the label, and you become the observer of the label. This is a subtle, yet massive, shift. It allows you to recognize that laziness is a state, perhaps a state caused by fatigue, or lack of inspiration, or fear, but it is not you. You are the one who is experiencing the state, and because you are the one experiencing it, you also have the power to influence it. You are not a finished product defined by your history. You are a process. You are a fluid, unfolding consciousness. Every time you refuse to turn a momentary feeling into a permanent identity, you are reclaiming your freedom. You are choosing to remain open to the person you are still in the process of becoming. Chapter Summary. The danger of using I am to describe temporary feelings or events fuses our identity with our struggles, creating a permanent sense of being less than. State versus identity: a state of being, e.g., feeling anxious or unsuccessful, is fleeting. An identity is a construct that we maintain through constant repetition. The consistency trap: the mind resists changing negative labels because it values consistency. It would rather remain predictably flawed than face the uncertainty of being unknown. Resistance as evidence: the feeling of self-deception when we try to speak positively is often just the old identity resisting its own dissolution. The observer shift, moving from I am label to I am having the thought that label, creates necessary distance and breaks the fusion between self and thought. The fluid self, we are not fixed products of our history, we are unfolding processes. Every moment provides an opportunity to detach from old labels. The power of language: by softening the language we use to define ourselves, we allow for the possibility of growth. Chapter 5: The subconscious does not need your permission to learn. There is a common misunderstanding that the subconscious is a magical, sentient entity that grants wishes, or a mystical engine that needs to be programmed with specific, daily rituals to work. This view misses the psychological reality of what the subconscious actually is: a highly efficient, pattern recognition system. Your subconscious does not care whether your thoughts are positive or negative. It does not care about your dreams of wealth or your fears of poverty. It is not sitting in judgment of your character. It is simply, tirelessly, learning. It is collecting data from every moment of your life, recording what you repeat, what you focus on, and what you associate with strong emotion. Think of it as a massive, silent filing cabinet. It is constantly categorizing your experiences based on your own internal reactions. If you spend your day rehearsing scenarios where you are rejected, the subconscious records: this is what rejection looks like. This is the script we use when we enter a room. This is the emotional tone we maintain. The subconscious doesn't need your permission to learn these patterns. It is on all the time. When you are sleeping, when you are stressed, when you are distracted, it is still observing. It learns from your habits, your fears, and your repeated assumptions. If you repeatedly fear that you are going to lose your job, the subconscious learns that job loss is a primary theme of your life. It begins to treat that fear as a priority, scanning the environment for evidence of it, and preparing your body to respond to it. This is not magic, it is conditioning. The body learns to mirror the mind. If your inner voice is consistently projecting threats, your nervous system responds by keeping you in a state of high alert. You might feel a tightness in your stomach or a shallow breath, not because there is an actual threat in the room, but because your subconscious has learned that it needs to keep you ready for the threat you are predicting. This is why you don't have to consciously choose a negative pattern for it to become ingrained. You just have to repeat it often enough, especially while feeling the weight of it. Emotional charge acts like a neon sign for the subconscious. It tells the system, this is important. Save this. Practice this. We often wonder why we keep repeating the same self-sabotaging behaviors even when we know better. It is because the subconscious is not ruled by your logical mind. It is ruled by what has been reinforced. If you have reinforced a habit of self-criticism for 20 years, that is the path of least resistance. It is the program that the system is currently running because it has been fed that data for 2 decades. The good news is that this same mechanism works in reverse. You can influence the system by changing the input. But you cannot simply think your way out of years of conditioning. You have to provide new, consistent data. You have to feed the system with new observations, new behaviors, and new interpretations. The subconscious is not an adversary. It is a servant. It has been faithfully executing the program you have been feeding it through your daily thoughts and reactions. If you have been unhappy with the results, it is not because the system is broken, it is because the system is doing exactly what it was trained to do. You do not need to trick your subconscious. You just need to become a conscious steward of the data you provide it. When you notice a thought that doesn't serve you, recognize it for what it is, an old piece of data. Then, consciously provide a new piece of data. Do this consistently, and the filing system of your mind will begin to adjust to the new reality. It is a process of learning, not a moment of magic. Chapter Summary. Pattern recognition. The subconscious is not a mystical genie, it is an efficient, non-judgmental system designed to identify and replicate patterns. Constant recording. The system is always on, collecting data from your thoughts, reactions, and emotions, regardless of whether you are trying to program it. The role of emotion. Emotion acts as a highlight or a neon sign for the subconscious, marking certain thoughts as important and prioritizing them for repetition. Body-mind feedback. Repeated thoughts create physical states, tightness, stress, that the subconscious learns as default settings for your daily life. Conditioning versus willpower. self-sabotage persists because the subconscious is governed by reinforced habits, not by our conscious, logical intentions. Stewardship. To change your life, you don't need to fix your subconscious, you need to change the input you provided through new thoughts and behaviors. Data over magic. Long-term change is the result of consistent, conscious practice, providing the system with new data until. Chapter 6. Why your mind keeps finding proof. If you have ever felt that your life seems to confirm your worst fears, you have experienced the power of confirmation bias and selective attention. The human mind is not an objective camera, it is a filter. It does not record reality as it is. It records reality as it expects it to be. If you carry a deep, internal belief that you are unwanted, your mind will scan every social interaction for evidence that confirms this. You might walk into a room where 9 people greet you warmly, but your attention will be pulled to the one person who doesn't smile. Your mind will ignore the 9 signs of acceptance and highlight the one sign of rejection. Then, you will walk away thinking, see? Nobody wanted me there. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a feature of your survival system. The mind wants to be right. Being right means the world is predictable, and a predictable world is a safe world. Even if the truth you are confirming is painful, even if it is a truth that keeps you small, isolated, or unhappy, your mind will defend it because it is consistent. We must be very careful here. We are not saying that negative experiences do not exist. Discrimination, loss, trauma, and hardship are real, objective events. To ignore them would be a lie. But we must distinguish between the events themselves and the evidence we gather from them. Confirmation bias is the mechanism by which we turn a single experience into a general law. We take one person's indifference and turn it into a rule about people. We take one business failure and turn it into a law about the economy. And once we have established these laws, we actively filter out any data that contradicts them. If someone offers us a compliment, we dismiss it. If an opportunity presents itself, we label it a trap. We are so busy defending our existing beliefs that we miss the very evidence that could set us free. Why do we do this? Because it is safer to be right about a negative outcome than to be wrong about a positive one. If you expect the worst, you are rarely disappointed, and you feel prepared. If you expect the best, you are vulnerable to disappointment. Many of us would rather live in the prison of a negative belief than face the uncertainty of hope. But look at the cost of this protection. When you filter your life for proof of your limitations, you are actively shrinking your world. You are dismissing the very possibilities that could change your identity. To break this, you must become a collector of counter-evidence. When your mind presents you with a fact about your inadequacy or your bad luck, challenge it. Ask, what is the other side of this story? When you feel the urge to interpret a neutral event as a sign of failure, stop and look for alternative explanations. Perhaps the person didn't smile not because you are unlikable, but because they were tired. Perhaps the delay in your plans is not a sign of failure, but an opportunity for a better strategy. You don't need to force yourself to be an optimist. You just need to become a more curious observer. Stop letting your mind treat its first, automatic conclusion as the final verdict. You are the judge, and you have the power to demand more evidence. By consciously looking for things that contradict your limiting beliefs, you begin to soften the filter. You allow more of reality to enter your field of awareness. And as you do, you might find that the world is far more expansive, and far more supportive, than your old thoughts ever let you see. Chapter Summary. The filtered mind. Our brains act as filters, focusing on information that confirms what we already believe rather than recording objective reality. Defense of consistency. The mind prioritizes being right, consistent, over being happy, because consistency creates a feeling of predictability and safety. The evidence trap. We often ignore positive data while obsessively collecting negative proof to sustain an identity built on limitation. Real versus interpreted. We must separate real external hardships from the negative narratives we construct as a result of them. Safety in negativity. Expecting the worst is often a defensive strategy to avoid the vulnerability of disappointment. The counter-evidence practice. we can weaken our limiting beliefs by actively seeking out information that contradicts them and considering alternative interpretations of events. Expanding awareness. By refusing to accept the mind's initial, automatic conclusion, we widen our perception and reveal our... Chapter 7, The Prophecies You Unknowingly Help Fulfill. We have explored how your mind filters reality to confirm your existing beliefs. But there is a further, more haunting step. You do not just observe your beliefs, you participate in them. You act in ways that help bring them into existence. This is the mechanism of the self-fulfilling prophecy. It is a subtle dance. It begins with an internal state, an assumption or an expectation. Let us take a common example. A person who holds the deep-seated belief that they are unlikable. This is not a conscious thought they walk around announcing, it is a quiet, rhythmic hum in the background of their mind. When they enter a social situation, that belief creates a subtle internal tension. They are waiting for the rejection they believe is inevitable. Because they are braced for rejection, they withdraw. They might hold back in conversation, avoid eye contact, or project an air of guardedness that others interpret as disinterest or coldness. The people around them, sensing this distance, naturally step back or engage with someone who seems more open. The person then leaves the room with the definitive thought, "See? Nobody liked me." The belief was not merely a description of the event, it was a participant in the outcome. The person acted in a way that made the outcome almost unavoidable. This happens in every domain of life. If you believe you are bad with money, you may unconsciously avoid looking at your accounts, procrastinate unnecessary decisions, or spend impulsively to soothe the anxiety that the belief creates, behaviors that inevitably lead to the financial instability you were afraid of. If you believe you are destined to fail in your career, you might avoid the risks necessary for growth, or subconsciously communicate a lack of confidence that keeps others from trusting you with larger opportunities. Again, we must be careful. We are not saying that you are solely responsible for every difficulty you face. The world is full of external constraints, systemic issues, and unpredictable variables. But we are examining the mechanisms of influence. The way your inner narrative subtly shifts your body language, your tone, your decision-making, and your capacity for persistence. The danger of this loop is that it is self-sustaining. The more evidence you produce, the more truthful the belief becomes. You eventually reach a point where you feel you have no choice, because you have spent years building a mountain of evidence to prove that you are limited. To stop this, you must learn to identify the bridge between your thoughts and your actions. Ask yourself, how do I behave when I am operating from this specific belief? If you believe you are incapable of change, do you act with resignation? If you believe you are unworthy of love, do you act with people-pleasing desperation or defensive withdrawal? Once you see the link between your internal narrative and your outward behavior, you have the opportunity to intervene. You don't have to start by changing your entire personality. You can start by changing one small action that contradicts the narrative. If the old narrative says, "You will be rejected," try one moment of genuine, undefended presence in a conversation. If the old narrative says, "You will fail," try one small, intentional step toward a goal that you usually avoid. You are not trying to force a different outcome. You are trying to break the synchronization between the old, limiting belief and your current behavior. You will be surprised by how much the world shifts when your behavior stops mirroring your fears. You are not a prisoner of your beliefs, you are their architect. And you can choose, today, to build a different kind of house. Chapter Summary. The hidden feedback loop. Beliefs don't just shape our view of the world. They shape our actions, which in turn produce outcomes that validate those very beliefs. Unconscious influence. We often unknowingly act in ways that ensure our predictions come true, e.g., guardedness leading to rejection. The evidence trap. Because we cause our own predictions to come true, we mistakenly believe we are psychic, or that our limitations are fixed realities. Ownership versus blame. Recognizing that we participate in our outcomes is not about blame for external hardship. It is about reclaiming the power to change our internal influence. Identifying the bridge. Every limiting belief is tethered to a set of habitual behaviors. The first step to change is observing those behaviors in real time. Intervention. transformation occurs when we interrupt the link between a thought and its corresponding defensive behavior. The architectural choice. We can choose to act in contradiction to our old narratives, creating a new pattern that produces different results over. Chapter 8, Why Positive Affirmations Sometimes Fail. There is a popular notion that the remedy for negative inner speech is to simply replace it with its opposite. We are told to look in the mirror and shout, "I am a millionaire," or "I am completely fearless," until our subconscious believes it. But for many, this does not work. In fact, it often backfires. It creates a state of cognitive dissonance, a painful, internal friction that happens when what you are saying, the affirmation, violently contradicts what you truly believe, your current self-concept. When you are deeply convinced that you are struggling, repeating, "I am wealthy," doesn't just feel like a lie, it feels like an insult to your lived experience. Your mind registers the gap between the words and your reality, and it responds with resistance. The inner voice, the one we've been tracking, doesn't stay silent. It gets louder. It says, "Who are you kidding? Look at your bank account. You're lying to yourself." This is why forced positivity often leads to a sense of exhaustion or shame. It treats the symptoms, the negative thoughts, without addressing the underlying architecture of your identity. It's like painting over a crumbling wall. The fresh coat of paint looks nice for a moment, but the rot beneath remains, and eventually, it forces its way through. True transformation is not about suppressing your current state with empty, optimistic phrases. It is about building a bridge. Consider the difference between a statement of fact that you don't yet believe, and a statement of intent that you can actually embody. Instead of, "I am wealthy," which your mind may reject as a falsehood, consider, "I am becoming more observant of my financial habits," or "I am willing to see new possibilities for my income." These are not just softer versions of affirmations. They are honest. They respect where you are right now, while clearly pointing toward where you want to go. They stop the internal war between your hope and your current self-concept. This is the difference between escapism and growth. Escapism is trying to pretend your current reality doesn't exist. Growth is acknowledging your current reality while simultaneously refusing to accept it as the final, absolute truth of your existence. When you use language that feels truthful to you, even if it is just a small step forward, your subconscious stops resisting. It begins to follow the direction you are pointing. It is a subtle shift, but it is the difference between a building that stands the test of time and one that collapses under the weight of its own contradiction. Don't use words as a weapon to attack your current self. Use them as a compass to guide your future self. Chapter Summary. The dissonance trap. Forced, overly positive affirmations often fail because they create an intolerable gap between our current reality and our spoken words. Internal resistance. When we affirm something that our subconscious identifies as a lie, our inner critic often reacts by becoming louder and more hostile. The rot under the paint. Suppressing negative thoughts without understanding their origin is a form of spiritual bypassing that leaves the underlying identity unchanged. Building a bridge. Effective language acknowledges where we are while opening a path to where we want to go. Honesty versus escapism. Authentic transformation requires honesty about our present state, not a denial of it. Bridge statements, using phrases that express willingness, curiosity, or intent, "I am becoming," reduces resistance and builds new neural pathways. Compass versus weapon. Language should be used as a guide for growth, not a. Chapter 9, The Moment You Hear the Voice. If you have stayed with this journey, you have likely begun to notice the background noise of your mind more frequently. You have started to catch the old sentences as they arise. This is the threshold of everything. In psychology, this is called metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking. But we can call it something simpler, the moment you wake up. Up until now, you have been in the water. You didn't know you were swimming because you thought the water was all there was. Now, you have poked your head above the surface. You have realized there is a you that is listening to the thoughts, which means you cannot be the thoughts themselves. This is a profound realization. Think about the last time you were gripped by a sudden, intense thought like "I am going to fail." Before, you would have just felt the fear, felt the tightness, and accepted the thought as your own opinion. Now, you have the chance to add a small, transformative prefix to your inner monologue. I am having the thought that. I am having the thought that I am going to fail. In that one sentence, everything changes. You have successfully separated the thinker from the thought. You have created space. You are no longer the one failing, you are the one observing the mind's tendency to predict failure. This space is the birthplace of freedom. When you are identified with a thought, you are a slave to it. You are reacting to it as if it were a physical reality. When you have space, you are the pilot. You can look at the thought and ask, is this useful? Is this true? Is this helping me move in the direction I want to go? You don't need to fight the thought. You don't need to fix it. You just need to keep that space open. This is where the open loop we mentioned in our introduction begins to close. Who are you beneath the descriptions? You are the one who is witnessing the narrator. When you hear that voice, that familiar, critical, or fearful voice, don't try to shut it up. That only gives it more power. Instead, greet it with a sense of calm curiosity. Oh, I see you again. That's the "I'm not good enough" story. I've heard this one before. By doing this, you are effectively demoting the voice from the voice of truth to the voice of habit. You are taking away its authority. You are becoming the witness of your own internal programming. And the moment you become the witness, you are no longer the one being programmed. You have arrived at the threshold. You haven't changed your life yet, but you have changed your relationship to your mind. And that is the most important change you will ever make. Chapter Summary. The wake-up moment, metacognition, thinking about our thinking, is the primary tool for breaking out of unconscious programming. The observer shift. Separating the thinker from the thought stops us from being at the mercy of every emotional impulse. The "I am having the thought" prefix, this simple linguistic shift creates the space necessary to evaluate thoughts rather than blindly reacting to them. Freedom in space. Once we create a gap between ourselves and our thoughts, we regain the capacity for choice and discernment. From authority to habit. By labeling thoughts as old stories, we demote them from absolute truths to familiar patterns. Calm curiosity, meeting negative thoughts with curiosity, rather than resistance, prevents them from escalating and maintains our sense of perspective. The witness position. The goal is not to stop the narrator from Chapter 10. You do not have to fight every thought. Many people believe that the path to a peaceful mind is a constant, rigorous battlefield. They think that the moment a negative thought, a fear, or an old, limiting script appears, they must immediately suppress it, argue with it, or replace it. They treat their mind like a high-security facility where every unauthorized thought must be intercepted and neutralized. But here is the great reversal: fighting your thoughts often intensifies them. Think of a thought as a ball floating in a pool of water. If you try to hold that ball underwater, you have to use constant, active, exhausting energy. The moment you lose focus or your strength wanes, the ball pops back up, often with more force than before. This is what happens when you suppress your inner voice. The more you tell yourself, "Don't think that," the more your mind focuses on exactly that. The subconscious doesn't understand negation. If I tell you not to think of a blue elephant, the very first thing your mind does is construct the image of a blue elephant to understand the instruction. So, when you tell yourself, "I will not be afraid," your mind is forced to focus on the concept of fear. The opposite of unconscious programming is not obsessive thought control. It is a conscious relationship. You do not have to fight every thought. You do not have to police your mind. In fact, the most transformative thing you can do is learn to let the thoughts simply be. You can acknowledge the presence of a fear without allowing it to dictate your behavior. You can hear a self-critical thought and recognize it for what it is, a passing electrical impulse in your brain, without needing to take it seriously. Think of your mind like a busy street. Thoughts are the cars passing by. Some are beautiful, some are ugly, some are loud, and some are broken down. If you decide that you must stop every car that you don't like, you are going to spend your entire life standing in the middle of the road, exhausted and overwhelmed. But if you stand on the sidewalk and watch the cars pass, you are no longer in danger. You are observing the traffic without becoming part of it. This is the state of non-resistance. It is the ability to hold space for your experience, including the uncomfortable parts, without needing to change them instantly. When you stop fighting, you stop giving the thoughts the energy they need to persist. This approach is profoundly different from passivity. You are not doing nothing. You are doing the most difficult thing of all, you are refusing to be hooked. You are practicing the art of allowing. When an old, critical sentence rises, you see it. You acknowledge it. You might even say to yourself, there is that thought again. It's a familiar one. And then, you return your attention to the present moment. You return to your breath, your task, or the person in front of you. You don't need to win the war against your thoughts. You just need to stop engaging in it. When you stop struggling, you find that the thoughts lose their sharp edges. They lose their ability to define you, to terrify you, or to command you. You realize that you were never the traffic, you were the observer on the sidewalk all along. Chapter Summary. The futility of suppression. Trying to push away or suppress negative thoughts requires constant, exhausting energy and often makes the thoughts stronger. The negation trap. The subconscious mind focuses on the content of a thought to understand a "don't do this" instruction, inadvertently reinforcing the idea we want to avoid. Conscious relationship. Transformation comes from changing how we relate to our thoughts, not from trying to control or police them. The traffic metaphor. Thoughts are like cars on a busy street. We are not the traffic, we are the observer on the sidewalk. The art of allowing. We can hold space for uncomfortable thoughts without needing to immediately judge or dismantle them. Refusal to be hooked. The most powerful response to an old, limiting script is to acknowledge it and then return our attention to our current, conscious reality. Loss of authority. When we stop fighting our thoughts, they lose their ability. Chapter 11. Changing the language of your inner world. Once you have learned to observe your thoughts without fighting them, you gain a new degree of freedom. You can now begin to refine your inner language. But remember, this is not about replacing reality with a script of forced, sunny optimism. It is about replacing inaccurate, absolute descriptions with ones that are more precise, compassionate, and true. The problem with many of our habitual inner sentences is that they rely on absolutes. We use words like always, never, everyone, and nothing. These words are rarely true, yet our minds use them as default settings to categorize our lives. Nothing ever works for me. I always ruin things. Everyone else is doing better than I am. When you catch these sentences, you don't need to force yourself to say, everything is perfect. That would be a lie. Instead, apply the tool of precision. Ask yourself, is that literally true? When you catch, nothing ever works for me, you might replace it with, some things haven't gone as I planned, but I have learned from them. Notice the shift. You have moved from a crushing, paralyzing absolute to a nuanced, grounded reality. You haven't denied the difficulty, but you have removed the sense of permanence. When you hear, I always ruin everything, try replacing it with, I made a mistake in this situation, and I am learning how to handle it differently next time. You have shifted the focus from your identity, ruining, to your behavior, a mistake, and your potential, learning. This is what we call honest reframing. It is the practice of speaking to yourself like a wise, compassionate friend, the kind of friend who doesn't lie to you about your flaws, but who also refuses to let you collapse under the weight of them. You are looking for bridge statements. These are sentences that feel credible to your current mind while opening a door to a different way of relating to your life. If you feel like you're not good enough, you might try. I am currently working on my skills, and I am becoming more capable every day. This acknowledges that you have room to grow, the truth, without declaring your lack of worth, the lie. This practice of conscious language also requires you to question the stories you have attached to your experiences. We often use language to turn temporary states into permanent identities. If you feel tired, you might say, I am a lazy person. Try instead, I am currently feeling exhausted. One is an identity, the other is a state of being. One closes the door to change, the other opens it. Changing your language is not about pretending to be someone else. It is about stopping the repetition of the person you were told you had to be. It is about reclaiming your own narrative, one sentence at a time, until the language you speak within yourself is as accurate and as growth-oriented as the life you truly want to live. Chapter Summary. The danger of absolutes. Words like always, never, and nothing turn complex experiences into restrictive, inaccurate laws. Precision as a tool. Replacing broad, absolute statements with precise descriptions of reality instantly reduces the feeling of being trapped. Honest reframing. Authentic transformation comes from acknowledging difficulty while removing the sense of permanence. The friend protocol. We should aim to speak to ourselves with the same balance of truth and encouragement that we would offer a friend. Bridge statements. Use phrases that feel true today but point toward a different future, avoiding the gap of cognitive dissonance. State versus identity. We must carefully use language that distinguishes between a temporary state, being tired, and a permanent identity, being lazy. The architecture of narrative. By intentionally editing our inner language, we stop repeating the stories of our past and Chapter 12, Speaking to the person you are becoming. When we begin to change our inner language, we reach a point where we are no longer just cleaning up the past, we are actively preparing for the future. We are learning to speak to the person we are becoming, not just the person we have been. This is the bridge between language and action. You cannot think your way into a new identity while your actions continue to feed the old one. But you can use your inner language to create the internal atmosphere necessary for new behaviors to take root. If you are a person who has spent years defined by lack of discipline, you might have spent years telling yourself, "I'm just not a consistent person." That sentence acted as a permission slip to give up whenever things got difficult. To become the person you want to be, you must change that inner directive. But you don't change it by wishing. You change it by engaging in what we call identity-based questions. Instead of declaring "I am disciplined," which your mind may reject, start asking, what would a person who is building consistency do at this moment? This shift is powerful. It moves your inner speech from a rigid declaration to a focus on inquiry. It invites you to participate in the identity you are building. It turns your life into a laboratory. If you are healing from self-rejection, stop repeatedly declaring that you are flawed. Start practicing the language of support. When you make a mistake, instead of the internal tirade, ask yourself, what is the most helpful way I can respond to this right now? By asking this, you are coaching yourself. You are teaching your subconscious that you are on your own side. This is how language, attention, and action move in the same direction. Your language sets the intention. Your attention notices the opportunities to act on that intention. Your action provides evidence that your identity is actually shifting. It is important to remember that this is not about instant success. There will be days when the old voice returns. There will be days when you fall back into the old patterns. This is part of the process. The goal is not perfection, the goal is commitment to the new direction. When you fall back, the old voice will say, "I told you so. You haven't changed." The new voice, the one you are cultivating, will say, "I slipped, but I am learning. I am still here, and I am still trying." That simple shift, from a voice of judgment to a voice of support, is the sound of a new self-concept being born. You are not waiting for perfection to arrive to define who you are. You are defining yourself by your commitment to the journey, by your willingness to learn, and by your choice to keep practicing, even when it is difficult. This is the inner language of someone who is truly becoming. Chapter Summary. Identity-based questions, moving from rigid declarations to curious questions, what would a consistent person do, opens the door for change rather than demanding it. The laboratory approach, treat your life as a place to test and refine your identity through intentional action and reflection. Language as coaching. Shift the internal tone from that of a harsh judge to a supportive coach who seeks the most helpful way forward. Synchronization, real transformation happens when language, attention, and action all pull in the same, intentional direction. The failure of perfection, expecting immediate perfection is an old, limiting script. Real growth is defined by the commitment to return to the path after slipping. The voice of support. Developing a supportive inner monologue is the definitive marker that a new self-concept is taking root. The journey of becoming, identity is not a final destination, it is the sum of the Chapter 13, What the Ancients Knew About Words. Long before modern neuroscience began mapping the neural pathways of habit, human beings across civilizations had already arrived at a profound, intuitive realization: the tongue is a rudder, and the mind is the ship. If you look through the lens of ancient wisdom, you see a recurring theme across disparate traditions. In the contemplative traditions of the East, it was recognized that the mind is a garden, and every thought is a seed. What you water with your attention, you eventually harvest in your experience. In Stoic philosophy, the emphasis was placed on the inner citadel, the realization that while we cannot always control the events of the world, we have absolute dominion over the judgments we attach to them. The Stoics knew that a person is not disturbed by events, but by the views they take of them. In the mystical traditions of the West, the significance of the word has always been held in the highest regard. There is an ancient, recurring intuition that our internal declarations are not merely neutral observations of reality, they are participatory acts. This is not because of some magical ability to conjure objects out of thin air, but because of the way our words shape our intentions, which in turn shape our choices, which in turn shape our lives. When you study the teachings of teachers such as James Allen or the New Thought pioneers of the late 19th century, you find a consistent call to take thought guarding seriously. They were not suggesting that one should live in fear of their own mind, but rather that one should treat the mind with reverence due to a creative power. They understood that you cannot consistently dwell on themes of failure and expect to act with the vitality of success. Yet, we must be careful not to confuse these ancient insights with modern-day clichés. These thinkers were not advocating for an empty, delusional positivity. They were advocating for mental clarity. They were teaching that the first step toward any form of mastery is the ability to withdraw one's mental consent from narratives that lead to suffering. Whether it is the Buddhist focus on right speech and right thought, or the Christian contemplative emphasis on the renewal of the mind, the recurring human intuition is the same: the landscape of your inner world dictates the landscape of your outer life. You are standing in a long line of human history. You are grappling with the same questions that thinkers, mystics, and philosophers have been asking for millennia: who is the one speaking within me? Can I choose to listen to a different voice? You do not need to adopt these ancient doctrines to benefit from their insight. You only need to recognize the truth they share. Your inner language is a sophisticated tool of perception. When used unconsciously, it can act as a chain. When used with awareness, it acts as a compass. The ancients knew that a person who masters their own inner conversation is, in every meaningful sense, a master of their own destiny. Chapter Summary. The universal intuition. Human traditions across history have intuitively recognized that the mind acts as the primary filter for our experience of reality. Thought as seed, the metaphor of the mind as a garden highlights that our experiences are the eventual harvest of what we consistently contemplate. The inner citadel. Stoic philosophy teaches us that our power lies not in controlling external events, but in mastering the judgments we make about them. Participatory words. Ancient teachings often view words as participatory acts, tools that shape our intentions, which subsequently dictate our behavior. Mental sovereignty. Classical thinkers viewed the mind not as a passive receiver, but as a creative space that requires guarding and intentional direction. Clarity versus delusion. Ancient mastery is rooted in clarity, withdrawing consent from destructive narratives, rather than in simple, delusional positivity. Historical continuity. You are participating in a timeless human pursuit, learning how to use the mind as a tool for free. Chapter 14, Beyond the Words. Who are you without the story? We have arrived at the most profound question of this journey. We have spent chapters exploring how to observe the narrator, how to edit the script, and how to change the language of your inner world. But there is a final, deeper mystery to confront. Who are you when the narrator stops speaking? If you were to remove every story you have ever told yourself, every account of your failures, every description of your personality, every label regarding your age, your status, your history, and your expectations, what would be left? Most of us are terrified of this question. We cling to our stories because they give us a sense of solid ground. We would rather be a struggling artist, or a disappointed parent, or a person who never gets a break, than be nothing at all. The story provides an identity. It tells us, and the world, where we fit in. But consider the possibility that you are not the story. Consider that the story is just a thin, artificial layer you have pasted over the vastness of your actual existence. When you sit in silence, when you turn off the radio, when you stop the inner chatter, you don't disappear. You are still there. You are the awareness that is aware of the silence. You are the presence that is witnessing the world. This presence doesn't have a history. It doesn't have a personality. It doesn't have a job title or a list of regrets. It is just, being. The reason this feels so important to explore is that it is the ultimate point of non-identification. When you realize that you are the space that contains the thoughts, rather than the thoughts themselves, you stop being vulnerable to every shift in the wind. You stop needing your life to look a certain way in order to feel okay. This is not a suggestion to abandon your life, your responsibilities, or your goals. It is a suggestion to stop anchoring your worth in them. When you realize that you are fundamentally independent of the stories you tell, you actually become more effective in your life. You stop acting out of fear, because you know that even if your story falls apart, you will remain. You are the sky. The stories are just clouds. Sometimes the clouds are dark and heavy with rain, sometimes they are light and golden in the sun. But the sky is never damaged by the clouds. It is never changed by them. It simply allows them to pass. Spend time in this silence. Practice sitting without the need to define yourself. Let the thoughts arise, let them describe you, let them judge you, and then let them go. Feel the part of you that remains untouched. That is your true nature. That is the source of your freedom. And from that place, you can finally start to tell a story that truly honors who you are. Chapter Summary. The Story Addiction. We often fear the silence of no story, because our narratives provide a false, but comforting, sense of solid identity. The presence beneath, you are not the narrator, you are the awareness that is witnessing the narrator. This presence is constant, regardless of your life's circumstances. Non-identification, realizing that you are the space containing the thoughts, the sky, rather than the thoughts themselves, the clouds, makes you fundamentally invulnerable. True effectiveness. When you no longer anchor your worth to your life's narrative, you act with greater clarity and less fear. The sky metaphor, like the sky, your true nature is vast and unaffected by the passing weather of temporary emotional states or mental judgments. Practicing being, we must intentionally spend time in states of being where we do not need to define, label, or explain ourselves to ourselves. A foundation for a new narrative. Only by knowing yourself as the observer can you choose to write a story that is. Chapter 15, The Words You Choose From Here. This is the threshold of your new beginning. We have walked the path from the unconscious, automatic voice to the realization of the observer. You now know that you have been repeating sentences you never chose. You know that those sentences have been shaping your perception, your identity, and your behavior. But you have also learned the most vital lesson of all, you are not your thoughts. What happens tomorrow? You will wake up. The voice will likely return. It might say, you are behind. You are not ready. This won't work. That is the nature of the mind, it is a creature of habit. It will try to pull you back into the old path because that is where the grass is flattened. When that happens, do not panic. Do not fight. Do not fear your own mind. Hear it. Ask, where did this sentence come from? Is it true? Does it serve where I am going? And then, make the conscious choice to let it pass. You have the power to stop giving every repeated sentence the authority to define you. You have the power to stop acting as if the first thought that enters your head is the final verdict of the universe. Your life is not a fixed script. It is an evolving dialogue. From here on, you are the editor. You are the one who decides which thoughts are worth the space they occupy in your mind. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to be happy every moment. You only need to be conscious. That is enough. The next time life feels difficult, pay attention to the language you use. Don't frame yourself as the victim of your circumstances. Frame yourself as the student of your experience. Don't frame yourself as a person who is stuck. Frame yourself as a person who is in the process of learning, growing, and evolving. You are the storyteller. The pen has been in your hand all along. You may have been writing the same old story for years, but today, you can start a new chapter. Write it with intention. Write it with kindness. Write it with the understanding that the most powerful thing you can ever do is simply hear the voice, and realize that you are the one who gets to decide what it says next. The journey continues now, in the privacy of your own mind. Listen well. Chapter Summary, Key Insights. The return of the voice. Expect the old patterns to recur, knowing they will return prevents them from catching you off guard. No need for panic. A negative thought is just a thought, not an emergency. We can remain calm even when the old voice speaks. The editor's power. You have the ongoing authority to withdraw your belief from thoughts that no longer serve the person you are becoming. Consciousness as the goal. You don't need to be perfect or positive all the time, you simply need to remain conscious of what you are repeating. Reframing circumstance. Shift from victim of circumstances to student of experience to maintain agency in difficult times. The evolving dialogue. Your life is not a fixed script but an evolving conversation that you actively participate in through your inner language. The responsibility of the pen. You are the author of your future. Start writing your inner narrative with the kindness and intent you wish to see. Conclusion. The listener within. Your subconscious has been listening. It has been listening to everything you have said, every day, since you were old enough to form a thought. But the truest transformation does not come from trying to trick it. It comes from the moment you stop treating your mind as a master and start treating it as a partner. You have walked the path from the unheard, automatic voice to the power of recognition. You have seen how inherited language, repeated enough times, hardened into an identity that felt like destiny. You have seen how your mind, acting like a filter, sought out evidence to prove that the story you told was true, even when that story kept you from your own potential. But you have also discovered the gap. You have found the silence beneath the noise. You now understand that a belief does not have to be true to influence your behavior. You understand that your identity is not a static object found in the past, but a living process created in the present. You have learned that the positive affirmations that once felt like lies were only failing because they lacked a bridge to your reality, a bridge you are now building with honesty, intent, and conscious observation. The goal was never to fill your mind with perfect, unwavering thoughts. The goal was to wake up. The next time an old, familiar sentence rises, you can't. You're too late. Nothing ever changes. Do not be afraid. You don't need to fight it, and you certainly don't need to believe it. You have heard it before. You know its origin. You know its history. Simply hear it. Ask where it came from. Ask if it is true. And then, with the quiet authority of the listener who knows the truth, decide whether it deserves another repetition. Perhaps the deepest power is not in forcing your mind to obey every word you speak. Perhaps it is in realizing that a sentence can be familiar without being true. A voice can be old without being wise. A story can be repeated without being your destiny. You are the one who listens. You are the one who observes. You are the one who decides. The subconscious will continue to listen to the words you say. But now, it is listening to a different person. It is listening to someone who is awake. It is listening to someone who is no longer the character in the story, but the one who holds the pen. The inner conversation continues.